Hello people, we are ready to go back and get ready with this game of Ryvius versus Flurry. Sorry about the short break, we were just making sure both players were ready and that there weren't any issues just getting into the match. So we are all good to go now, and hurrah, there is a warrior ban, Derek. So Flurry's warrior is gone and his hunter is going to be the shield for Flurry, and then Ryvius' hunter is banned out and Ryvius is shielding his paladin, which is just a Ryvius thing to do, I feel.
It is, and his strategy makes a good amount of sense. I like that we're seeing a bit of shaking up in terms of how warrior is interacted with, because I'd say the standard strategy we've seen so far in week 1 of this season of Grandmasters has been shielding your warrior, banning the mage, is what a lot of players have gone for, because warrior does very well against a lot of the aggressive decks, generally suffers against the mage. Ryvius here gone with a different strategy of protecting his paladin, banning the warrior, because I imagine the worst matchup for the paladin, probably the Born Warrior from Flurry. So it makes a lot of sense to get rid of that and give it a really good shot against the mage, and I would say a pretty good shot against the rogue and the hunter as well.
Yeah, and I think the key is the warrior matchup is winnable, but you have to jump through hoops, whereas pretty much every single other matchup in the game, outside maybe Druid, is fairly straightforward. You need to survive, you can get them to 25 health fairly easily, and you Holy Wrath them in the face for 25 and the game ends. That's normally how it works. Whereas Druid, not really represented this week, although I do expect that to change next week.
Me too.
At the moment, Warrior's the one where it's like, oh, so I have to play exactly like this, and things have to go right for me to win. Let's just remove that from the equation and go, okay, against these 3 other decks, I know exactly what I've got to do.
That's right.
Because this is best of 3, I feel like this kind of strategy may be very powerful, because if you feel like you can, I won't say guarantee a win, it's Hearthstone, you can just lose, but if you can feel very strong that you can get 1 win on the board, it's a best of 3. You need 1 more, and then that's just the series over. It's not best of 5 where you have to win with every deck. If you just need 1 more win, and if your shielded class is so powerful in the matchup, you're going to be feeling very confident throughout the rest of the series.
I think you are, and I think it's a good decision for Ryvius. I hope it works out well, because I am of the opinion that Sottle seems to be, when I was watching the European broadcast, that this is just a good deck. I think that the OTK Shabala Paladin is very well placed in the metagame at the moment, specifically in an open field tournament like Masters Tour Seoul, where you're expecting a higher percentage of mages. But still, I would say in Grandmasters, if you're going for the strategy of banning the warrior, does great against the mages, pretty good against the aggro decks too.
And this is one thing where I feel like, honestly, and I am going to go a little bit on the defensive a little bit for the game, is that although there are issues that, I think a good chunk of them are being fixed with the nerfs, there are so many decks you can play in the game right now. So, every class almost has multiple archetypes that are not only playable, but good. And Paladin's one of them. We've seen Murloc Paladin, we've seen Holy Wrath Paladin. There's also Quest Paladin that definitely has a slot, depending on what you want to do. So there are so many decks that are playable right now. The game's actually in a very good state, and potentially an amazing state post-nerf this week.
I agree. I think Hearthstone, both of the recent expansions have been very, very good ones, in my opinion. A lot of high-powered stuff, and generally, I would say, a lot of cards that are not too toxic, because a lot of the time when you see high-powered cards, they can be problem cards in the meta. Obviously, at the moment, Dr. Boom and Galaxy. Thinking back, of course, old Dr. Boom, some of the weapons, the legendary weapons that came from Cobalt and Catacombs. These couple of expansions seems, for the most part, like a lot of the cards are strong, but not too problematic.
Yeah, they don't just break games a lot of the time. Not the ones that they mentioned, but as we get into this game now, is
going lightning fast.
They're also kind of going through the motions. This matchup, although not the same because Reno Hunter's not been played really before, the Hunter still is trying to kill the Paladin, and the Paladin's trying to survive and do its Holy Wrath. But just looking at Flurry's list, I give this deck a lot of flack a lot of the time, but this is my preferred list if you're going to force me to play it. It has a High Main in there, a Siamat in there as well, and it still has the Leroy package, and it has that Hunter's Pack, which I feel buffs Zul'jin to so much more because it's there. So I feel like this is a very solid version to take on a deck like Paladin.
I semi-agree with you. I think the cards like, in particular, Savannah Highbane is really nice against the Paladin, because if you remember back over the last expansion cycle, at the very least, the real thing that Paladin decks lost to, be it OTK Paladin or Cube Paladin was that they lost 2 cubes a lot of the time. They didn't have good answers to these sticky Death Rattle minions, and Savannah Highmane functions similarly to that. It's a big front-end body, but it also has a lot of pressure afterwards. So even though Ryvius has a decent way to clear up the board here, he's still taking a pretty good amount of damage from just a 6-mana minion.
Yeah, even with the heal 2, he took 4, and he's going to take another 4.
Right. This has done its work.
Not only another 4, but board control. The minions still exist
yeah.
in going into his second turn of this Highmane. So very, very solid overall.
But yes, while I agree on the Highmane, the Hunter's Pack I think in this matchup is a little slow. Value against Paladin is not what you want, because if you're just going slowly and you have a full hand, plenty of value, lots of gas, that doesn't matter because you're dead. Because they just OTK you later on in the game. You need quick cards that end the game right now.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking along the lines more of if you're short on beasts, it gives you a beast. It gives you a weapon, which is more damage. You know, like it gives you things you may be missing out on to push more damage.
If you have a super aggressive start.
Yeah. If you're missing out on stuff.
Yes.
But I think Tiamat's good as well. So I think 2 out of the 3 cards are pretty good in this matchup, which is solid for me.
Not even sure what what Ryvius has left in his deck to draw off of that Crystology. I think we've seen both Novices at this point.
Thalnos is in hand.
Thalnos is in hand. Crystal Smith Kangor's in hand. We've seen the Blood Cell Corsair as well. I think this might only draw Acolyte.
It might also end up just play it and get it out of the way. You need 20 hand. Yeah, it's going to be 1 mana on the Shivala. Yes, 1 mana might not be mind-blowing, but for 1 mana, just get rid of a card in this deck is good, actually. Like, it's a deck that you could often say, you know, I can't hold all these cards and see what the draw is now, and yeah, it's just the Acolyte you actually.
Which I think is actually arguably better than drawing 2 cards here for Ryvius, because you so often run into hand space issues, and he's going to want to make the time as soon as he finds them to play Prismatic Lens,
I mean, look at this, even just coin it out, just get it all out there as quick as you can.
0 mana reduction on Shivala may not seem like much as well, but it starts to add up.
I get it.
You were nodding along with me for a second, like, yep, Derek, quiet, let the big boys talk.
Because I didn't clock 0.
Yeah.
You were like, all I heard was the mana reduction on Shivala. I was like, okay, where's he going with this? I'll obviously co-cast it, I'll play along, yeah. I'll you know.
No, you were being too good at your job there, in respecting my opinion.
We both go under the bus. but yeah. It's one thing I used to have a problem with sometimes when I was casting with Sol. Because he used to always tell me he's always right. Yeah. The times when I would presume he was right and he'd actually be wrong, even though I thought the correct thing. Yeah. I'd be like, oh, well, yeah, which must be the case. Right. Yeah. And then I learned quickly.
Just call him a
even gods bleed.
I can almost hear him making that his Twitter bio right now from across the oceans.
I'm just gonna message pop up now. It's like, so you shouldn't be awake. What's going on? But still, the pretty clean clear up of the Acolyte is nice, but also not the end of the world for Ryvius.
Oh yeah,
it means he's not going to overdraw, and he can clear this board.
Look at this board cleared, which means that for Flurry, I think he's pretty clearly all in on the plan of burn damage, which is not a ridiculous plan at all. The way his hand stacks up, it is very, very possible that he would be able to close out this game with burst damage. That does change things. That does mean you can go a little bit more for value and board control, for the moment at least. But if he's going to go for a burn plan, it has to come quick, because soon enough, Shivala's going to come down and put a very quick stop to that.
Yes. And the problem, or the biggest problem, is even Shivala trades Shuffle just to survive. Hunter doesn't really have the consistency and long-term reach that it used to. So you can't just be like, oh, well, he healed. I've got way more stuff, I'll just kill him. Like, no, it doesn't really work like that anymore, at least not in this build.
Seema has an interesting little pickup. Like, just going for Divine Shield Wind Fury is obviously the classic offensive option at this point. Would not be bad, but when there's 1/1s in play, the Divine Shield becomes a lot less tempting. So maybe we see Life Drinker unleash the beast for more mana utilization. Doesn't feel great though.
What about Taunt Wind Fury?
What does that do?
It doesn't put you to 25.
Okay.
I know there's a Life Drinker, but you're then going to take another 2 back, and you've seen 1 weapon, you've seen a Consecrate, you know, you've seen a lot of those things that can just get you to below 25. There's no Zul'jin in hand either, but there is Ziliax and Life Drinker, so
I think if that was going to happen, I would prefer Divine Shield there, because it means that like True Silver can't take it out with the 2 minions. Whereas here, Flurry is making sure he fits in those hero powers now, very clearly setting out his game plan.
Hunter 101.
Burn City.
Yeah. If you can press that hero power, you normally want to.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's pretty good.
This is turbo cycling. I'd say that's great.
Also, as you can see, one thing that you may not expect in this list is the Zephyrus. Zephyrus is alive and active, good to go.
Yeah.
So even if there's an emergency reactionary turn needed, well, this deck has +1 of those now because Zephyrus is playing.
That's right. It's so beautifully flexible as well. Zephyrus can be used, of course, to find that little bit of extra burst damage to close out the game. Maybe you need an eviscerate. It can also find heal, removal. It does
Weapon
everything
removal, taunt. Like, it's such a good card for these decks that draw a lot. Similar to, again, I've been playing this Malygos druid,
Yes,
and
fantastic.
it doesn't run Zephyrus, but Elise is the same. But you run all 2 ofs, and then Elise and Malygos, which are legendaries, and that's it.
Yeah.
Because you draw so fast, you get to this state. It's going to be a nice little play there, given the Divine Shield, so it means it does not heal.
Very
Ryvius
nice.
for an additional 7, and
That was crucial.
although he's on 19 and not close to death, effectively reducing 7 damage.
Right,
health
he's got to
is
start
a
somewhere.
lot.
Because Ryvius is quite clearly very far in the lead, I think, as it currently stands. It's getting close to a lockout victory. Obviously only needing to do a little bit of extra damage in order to be able to get over the 25 threshold.
It's outside of Zul'jin, it's almost guaranteed already.
Yep.
Because Ryvius has not been forced into timeouts, and he has 2. So he can already buy 2 turns, which is 2 more cards, which means there's 2 cards left in the deck. So if he survives 1 more turn, and then just timeout, draw, game.
That's what I mean by pretty close to a lockout victory.
Reporting for duty.
Oh, he's even going for it now and just wants to ignore the CMS, which...
Right, this basically forces Flurry to commit something more to the board, I think, and then you can very happily go Pyro Shrink Ray.
And I think, excuse me a little bit, it's also a nod to Zul'jin in that, as you said, that if Zul'jin comes down on with 10 mana, the Pyro Shrink Ray just deals with the whole issue, and then you can move on with your life.
Does draw a whole bunch of cards there for Flurry, but again, this like value line of play of drawing cards, filling up your hand, does not get the job done against Paladin. You've got to kill them quick. And this is why I think it is such a strong deck right now, because Ryvius hasn't done anything particularly busted this game. But as long as you can just weather the onslaught, which it can do very easily, mid-game just belongs to Paladin. It draws so quickly. Like, the draw engine in Paladin is absurd.
1 mana, draw 2 cards that draw you cards.
Right, it's like it's probably the best card in the game right now. It's just less obvious and less egregious than Luna.
It's reminiscent, but obviously not the same as Call to Arms.
Right.
And it's 1 card that generates you so many more cards worth of draw. Because, you know, back when you were playing like Loot Hoarders and stuff like that, like you just kept drawing cards.
I remember it well.
4 mana.
Yeah, as expected here. He delays, then he clears. Says to Flurry, you got to find a way to kill me off here. And now with the Zephyrus, this gets a little bit more interesting. If we were to see Leroy and Animal Companion and Hero Power, if it was Huffer, that's 11 damage. Maybe Zephyrus could close it out the next turn with a Gore Howl. I don't know.
What do you think
I wonder
about potentially like Leroy Ziliax? Is that ever something you want to consider? The 1/1's become very lackluster. I'm not sure about it.
I guess so.
I'm just thinking, you Leroy push 6. You've just seen a lot of removal, although you do know there's a Consecrate. I guess is the problem. That's the issue with playing with Paladin. You know they've drawn the deck. I'm just thinking of how you can push the most damage whilst being safe and healing.
Right.
It's a lot of ifs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm wondering if there's any way that he can get the damage through without Shivala being able to heal, which I guess he could because there's the freezing trap in play.
It's not just Zephyrus Tyrion. Shivala can't heal from the Divine Shield. There'd have to be like Consecrate Shivala,
Yeah.
and then you get a weapon, which swings for 5.
I think like even that is too slow, to be honest. I think he just dies before that happens.
Like you can't.
But it's too slow. Like it's just timeout. It's just timeout.
I guess. But like you can't kill the Tyrion, so it's just
He
doing
doesn't
6
need
a
to, is what
turn.
I'm saying.
But then you can just Celiax the turn after.
Like, even if he just goes like Zephyrus into a board clear or a weapon removal for the Tyrion.
But there's a turn gap, right?
Is there?
Well, if he times out now, he draws 1 card.
Yeah. Zephyrus buys him another turn, and then he draws a card and wins the game.
But does Zephyrus buy him another turn?
Well, it can clear the board every time.
Right, but then, I mean, you've got like Leroy Hero Power Weapon Swing.
Maybe.
That's like 13 damage if it's a Tyrion weapon.
Maybe.
I'm just thinking, that's all,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it makes Shivala difficult to play. If Tyrion's cleared, you get 10 damage if you say over 2 swings, if you can make it that far. And there is a gap, because there's 1 timeout, but 2 card draws.
I think it's still a little bit too slow, and I think from Flurry, the more important thing to go for is try and rely on putting as much immediate pressure on right now, and then setting up for Shivala being frozen.
But the Shivalas doesn't matter if it's frozen. It's got to come down on the turn he loses.
Oh, I guess it just comes back
So
down
it doesn't
against
matter,
Flurry.
yeah.
Freezing it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think, was Tyrion actually less pressure than what he played anyway?
Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's very tough. It's definitely hard to play against timeout. And now, he's just a little bit off damage-wise, health-wise, right? You can't heal for more than 3, which puts him at 25.
Yeah. Flurry just needs to rely on the fact that he doesn't die on this turn.
Yeah, Ryvius might have to go for the 50-50.
That's how this shakes out. He needs to calculate damage, of course. Because if he can find a way to clear the board here first, but I don't think that's even possible.
Almost out of cards.
Max, no, that only does 5.
That's game. Yeah.
Oh, there you go. Oh, okay.
Draw a card.
Yeah.
Yeah, shuffle.
Obviously, we don't know exactly what cards
Yeah.
are left. We can't track that well. But, yes, that being
that was
Flash
close.
of Light was...
Yeah.
It was tricky, wasn't it? It was
clutch.
very tricky.
Yeah. Oh, no, wait. It's not even lethal, though, because he's only at 26.
Oh, wait.
Let's stash that away.
Rush that? Is he just going to do it anyway and then consecrate next turn? He can still
he
recast
activates the
Shivala. He
freezing
can
trap.
recast Shivala.
Oh, yeah, he can. Yeah, and then get rid of the taunt. It's fine. It's
Yeah,
lethal.
yeah.
Yeah, there we go. He found
There we
it.
go, yeah. It was just a second there where I was like, wait a
Yes.
minute.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, Shivala's still 0. It doesn't matter. You're fine.
Or the backstab,
Yeah,
whatever. He's got it through there.
Because the weapons are...
I was just thinking for a second, like, have we missed it here? Is there any way he gets messed up there by the freezing trap? He gets it done in the end, though. And that was a surprisingly close end there. Because I was fully expecting that the Paladin would just sail through to victory after that dominant mid-game.
And again, I'm definitely going to go back and just see what... Because I can't quite recall exactly what that turn was after Zephyrus. But, like, just Zephyrus Tyrion, a 3-2, a 6-6 Divine Shield and Taunt, which death rattles into a high damage weapon. Seems like a lot of damage potential.
It does.
It might not have ended up working, but for me, as one single turn, it seemed like the highest damage output possibility.
I see where you're coming from. I think that the bow plus the hero power that you fitted in was obviously 5 immediate damage, which makes a big difference, whereas Tyrion, you play it, they can then go for the timeout, which means it doesn't die for another turn anyway.
That is very true.
And then it takes another turn to get going. I think it's a good point you raise. I think, however, just going for the immediate burst damage and getting that in turn after turn
and also
is more consistent.
Right, exactly. He ended up getting Leok, which is unfortunate. But yeah, that was just game number 1. Pretty close, but Ryvius impressing so far with, again, just a deck that not many people have submitted. Not many people have submitted Paladin, to be honest, never mind this specific version. But
I think it's strong.
He has made it work, yeah, and it looked pretty good. Even though the game was close, I think Ryvius had a fairly solid handle on the game overall. So that was just game number 1, though. We've got game number 2, as always, coming up after a break.
Well played.
What's up, Hearthstone fans? It's TJ Sanders. Welcome to another episode of Well Played. If you've watched competitive Hearthstone in the past, chances are you've heard the casters say something like this.
Is nothing. Ooh, this is weird. The game turns around this turn.
But why didn't we play? I guess he wants to. Okay, so I understand what it's case he's doing.
Conceal
here.
information.
Exactly.
At first glance, what you do and don't know in a game of Hearthstone appears to be pretty straightforward. Both players can see everything that happens on the board, and when you see your opponent's class, you can get a good idea of what cards they might have in deck. Information is everything in the tavern. The most valuable information? What's in your opponent's hand? And yet, players of all levels can be prone to certain bad habits that unnecessarily give away that precious info.
I will hunt you. I will hunt you down.
Bad habit number 1, hovering. Whenever you mouse over a card in hand, your opponent can see this as a red outline around the card. Say it's turn 3, you have no minions on board, and your hunter opponent keeps hovering over 2 cards before they settle on playing Animal Companion.
To my side.
Their only other good on-curve play is Master's Call. Based on the hovering, you can get a good idea of where the Master's Call would be in hand. Bad habit number 2, pointing. Whenever you target minions on board with effects from hand, your opponent will see a red arrow indicating your intended target, even if you don't end up casting the card. For example, you see the red arrow as your rogue opponent uses a card from the far left to target their own evil miscreant before they end turn. They just gave you 2 bits of information. 1, they have a card in hand that targets minions, and 2, it's likely to be Shadow Step because you're playing against rogue. Generally, bad habits like these can be avoided by planning out your entire turn in advance. Try not to hover over or point with any cards until you know the entire sequence of actions for that turn. Bad habit number 3, playing the wrong copy of a card. Though this is usually a habit born of forgetfulness, it's something that top players should try to optimize. The meta these days is rife with cards that generate other cards. Every once in a while, especially when you can discover, you end up with additional copies of cards you already run in your deck. Cards like these tend to be more valuable because your opponent can rarely account for them. When I play Cyclone Mage or Tempo Rogue, I often find myself asking, wait, which one of these started in my deck again? Unlike the history bar, where generated cards played are labeled with created by, nothing in your hand has such a label. If you're forgetful like me, here's a pro tip. Use golden cards. A golden Shimmerfly would also produce a golden Deadly Shot, and when you run into a memory block, all you need to remember is, save the shiny one. Bad habits can be hard to break, but if you consciously remind yourself of these simple solutions, you'll be reading hands like a Grandmaster in no time.
Well played.
We are back and going into game number 2 between Ryvius and Flurry. And Ryvius off to a great start with his Paladin, just getting that one already done with. His shielded class took a win, and now he has arguably the 2 strongest classes in the game right now, Mage or Warrior, to pick from going up against Flurry's lineup. And if you ask me, Derek, it looks like a Warrior goes 2 good matchups versus Mage's arguably 1 in a mirror match.
Yeah.
So I
Pretty
would be
clear
surprised
Warrior.
if he doesn't play Warrior.
Yeah.
And I'm surprised.
We are left surprised,
Yeah.
absolutely.
You got me. Although, okay, I wind it all back actually. Ryvius isn't playing Reno Mage, right? He's playing a different
True.
list.
Yeah, true.
So to be fair,
More defensive.
with way more defensive options, when we've talked about in the past, Cyclone Mage having what I felt was reasonable to good matchups versus a Mech Hunter, very aggressive
Bet,
deck,
yeah.
because it has 2 Ray of Frost, 2 Frost Novas, 2 Doomsayers. All of these cards come into play versus a deck like Hunter, like Rogue. So maybe Ryvius has decided that actually this Mage deck is good because not only does it have the juice versus Warrior in the late game, it has the juice versus aggro, which leads me to the question of why are people playing Reno Mage?
I mean, I think it's not
don't get me
quite so
wrong,
clear
I'm not
cut
saying
as
it's as straightforward as that,
Yeah.
because I don't know how good this deck is.
Yeah.
But if this deck is good, then is there a good enough reason to play Reno
Right,
Mage?
I mean, I fully agree that I think Reno Mage might have gone a little bit too much hype in terms of how strong it is because it's fun, it's new, people want to play the new cards in the expansion. And, you know, Reno Highlander decks traditionally are a great way to play as many new cards as possible. I do think that it's very possible that this is the way to go. I haven't tested it myself, and you do obviously lose out on some pretty big stuff. Primarily, obviously, Zephyrus and Reno itself, which are fantastic anti-aggro, or mainly anti-mid-range cards, which is, I think, a lot of the ways that Mage can struggle.
You know, I wonder if you ever see, or we ever see, we can see it together, I guess, of the Reno in a deck that isn't one-offs, similar to way other cards. Because remember, we've seen Reno in Freeze Mage back in the day, right?
That's a very different thing.
And it's a very different deck, 100%. But if you feel like you can get away with not needing Reno on 6 because you're running things like Double Doomsayer, maybe Reno's just a card that's playable. I don't know.
Maybe. I would envisage that doesn't become the case for a couple of reasons. Primarily, Mage's draw engine is not that strong at the moment. Like, the way that Mage draws a lot of cards is when you go Pocket Galaxy into Luna, and you've won the game anyway at that point, so who cares? And also, original Reno had a great late-game effect. Reno the Relicologist has a great mid-game effect. It's not that good at the end of the game, because you're probably either cleared the board or you're dead at that point anyway.
Okay. Just an interesting thought.
It is an interesting thought, because Druid and Paladin have both got their singleton decks.
Doomsayer coming down, and again, you've got to look at this hand and say, 2 Blizzards. Like, the Doomsayer's there, the Keysmith's there, the Bone Wraith's there. Much more likely to be there when you are running 2 of. So this is actually very interesting to watch. And that's just okay.
Yeah, the new buff to Zephyrus's IQ means he does offer an answer to Doomsayer every time, whereas traditionally that was his weakness. He didn't quite appreciate how strong the Doomsayer was. Which is kind of an interesting addition to the way Zephyrus works, because they've stated they don't usually want to give him knowledge of specific scenarios and how they work. Doomsayer, however, was kind of general enough to, and it was frustrating enough to play with. It would
be like, imagine if they release a card that's 0 attack, 10 health, if it lives next turn, win the game. Right? It would have to recognize the fact that the 0 attack minion is a threat in itself. Not that they will release a card like that, but it's just an example. Now it's Nova into Doomsayer. He's going to put another block up for Flurry to try and get over. Does not have access to Deadly Shot, but does have access to a coin. And I've heard if you pay Bran 1 coin exactly on turn 6. Oh, he's going this way. Okay. I thought he was going to play.
I think I like the CMA instead. It goes up to, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it goes up to 7 attack, or 6 attack, because I was going to say, I would imagine he goes for the Wind Fury. In the end, he doesn't even need to go for that. This allows him to go for the Divine Shield for a bit more defensive capability.
I think also as well, this sets up lethal, right? Whereas if it's not frozen, he then plays Bran to just kill. Ryvius is on 14 health, which is a little bit dicey.
But for now, this game, which has been going lightning fast, seems to be approaching its end, with Ryvius, even if he were able to go for Blizzard here, would still just be dying to very, very little.
Hold the phone.
So it looks like we are in for a Bless RNG puzzle box of Yogg-Saron to decide the game.
Okay, take that, Tortolan.
Okay.
Prep.
This is all pretty bad so far.
Freezing Trap.
Okay. Not quite big enough, Agatha.
It's not looking great, is it? No freezes, no big AoE.
Mediocre.
A lot of value, but that's about it. And Ryvius is very, very dead. One thing I do respect.
Yes.
He could have frozen the board and technically stayed alive. No.
No, he couldn't. It was a 2-mana prep, not a 3-mana prep.
No, not this time. I mean, before he played the Tortolan,
right,
he could have frozen the board and technically lived.
I guess.
And tried to do some other things.
I think it was good recognition of where he was at.
Yeah, he needed something pretty big to happen, and he did not get it, which means that in another blink of an eye, again, honestly, it continues to baffle me the amount of times we have seen Reno Hunter, or Bran Hunter, Highlander Hunter. I feel like it either does nothing or obliterates something. And it's so weird to me that it feels like it just does an extreme of one or the other. It feels like it's not a very consistent and solid deck, but sometimes, or half the time maybe, it just destroys people. If you can get that curve, there's not really many things that can even match it.
That's right.
It's
And
weird.
I think when we're talking about whether or not decks should be Highlander or regular versions with duplicates, situations like that, when you see how Zephyrus was just single-handedly game-ending.
Yes.
Like, there was just no coming back for that there for the Mage. As soon as the Doomsayer died, it was just playing from behind the entire time. Even if there was Pocket Galaxy, a whole bunch of draw, I just don't think it was coming together there because there was too much aggression.
It would have to been pretty impressive to be able to come back from that point. So, all even, both shield classes have took a game. And now it's coming down to a good, I don't know if I can say old-fashioned because it's fairly new.
Newfangled.
But maybe in terms of amount of games played, good
Yes.
old-fashioned Reno Mage Mirror.
Yeah, the Mage Mirror was by far the most represented single matchup at Masters Tour Seoul with, no real surprise there. It was about 40% of the field playing Mage decks with some sprinkling of Cyclone Mage, but mainly Reno Mage in there. And it can be a pretty crazy matchup. We've already seen today Tyler getting absolutely destroyed by Samuel Tsao, I think it's fair to say, after he got his Luna's Pocket Galaxy counterspelled and then taken to pieces.
Although I'll stop you there, it's force of habit. It's not Reno Mirror, is it? Because Ryvius isn't playing Reno.
Oh yeah, of course.
We're so used to just,
Sorry,
we're just
that
in
is true.
the deep Reno territory. That of course Ryvius isn't playing Reno. He's playing his big mage, I guess. So we'll call it for now. But basically, it's 2-offs versus not 2-offs. So maybe this is the deciding factor.
Right. This
of
could make
who's more consistent, who gets it done better.
Could make for a very interesting matchup. You've obviously got, again, positives and negatives on either side, because a lot of the tools that Reno Mage, I guess, has to put in because it's a Reno deck, like, Polymorph in there for a bit of extra removal.
Even Volpera, for example.
Yeah, Volpera, stuff like that. It's often not that bad. It just gives you a bit of extra flexibility to fight back against some of their big minions early on. But at the same time, Ryvius has a much more consistent ability to get down big minions like Giant.
Yeah, I'd say like, 20% of the cards in the Mage deck are pretty suboptimal as cards, but you obviously need to fill the 30 cards out, so they do make the cut, because they're definitely not bad. They're just not the strongest cards available. But looking at the opening hands here, of course, we will point out that for Flurry, Luna's Pocket Galaxy is in hand and ready to go on turn 5, whereas Ryvius does not have access to that, but does have access to a fairly solid set of turns going forward. Arcane Intellect, Mountain Giant, another Arcane Intellect, Khadgar if Conjurers is picked up. Ryvius could end this game the old-fashioned way of just a million giants.
This feels like in the, in whatever fantasy setting it would be, the long-forgotten power that new technology has pushed aside. Like, people are all obsessed with Luna's Pocket Galaxy drawing your whole deck. They've forgotten the raw power of giant Khadgar Conjurers calling. It's insane.
It's like Derek's basically commentary on, nature versus technology and the things the human race is doing to Earth.
Well, it always feels like, there's always an ancient magic or whatever that the ancient races knew how to harness.
And now, no counterspell available, which
Like
means
Shard Blades. That's a good example.
like.
Shard Blades.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I thought you said something else. Then I was like, it's completely not reasonable for broadcast discussion.
No. Yes.
Whoa! Pocket Galaxy though is there, and it's gonna be fair. Both players have Pocket Galaxy. Let's go.
Ryvius, is gearing up, I think, for something even more powerful than the Galaxy here. And I love this. You set up
this.
giant coin Conjurers calling.
Who have forgotten the ways.
Exactly. Look at this.
Reno with his newfangled Gatling gun. It's like, we didn't use guns in my day. We used Conjurers calling on giants.
His hubris is his undoing. As I think once we see Khadgar Conjurers...
So you just look at him and be like, why did people stop playing this? Because it's just dead. Or at least it feels like it anyway.
What to do? What to do?
It's just funny, isn't it? You just look at this board and go, Although he can probably draw a Mountain Giant. Does he have other what other elementals?
Or
Siamat?
Zephyrus and Siamat.
Zephyrus, Siamat, Mountain
Behold,
there we go. 1 mana Siamat. That'll get it done. Frost Nova obviously not what he wanted there to keep the draw train going. And this is one of the reasons why Siamat was... some people had some mixed opinions on how good it would be because we were in the middle of a very much Mountain Giant dominated meta with Cyclone Mage being the premier deck pre-expansion. And Siamat, as you can clearly see, lines up horrendously against Giants.
Yes. I think people's thoughts on CMAT in general were very interesting because I felt like a lot of players thought it was going to be the neutral of the expansion. There's normally always a neutral you put in every deck.
The new Ziliax was a phrase
Yes.
tossed around a lot.
Yeah. And then, you know, like Medivh in the past as well.
Sure.
There's just so many just one-card neutrals you always put in decks. Going all the way back to Ragnaros and Sylvanas. The old-timers now rocking in the retirement home of Hall of Fame. But now, again, you just look at this and go, why did we stop? Were we wrong? Did we take technology too far down?
Has science truly gone too far?
It's like June. You were telling me about
It
technology's
is.
gone so far, you now have to use the antiquated ways to actually win games.
Exactly, computers are forbidden. Unfortunately for Flurry, this is not forbidden at all, and he is facing it
You
down.
cannot just ask a judge and be like,
Yeah.
admin, this was last expansion, what's he doing?
It certainly feels like cheating, though. This was turn 6 from the mage that all this has come down. Truly ridiculous.
And also as well, correct me if I'm wrong, but Ryvius has not exactly had too much help from Pocket Galaxy, right?
No, yeah,
Since
yeah.
It's
It
still in his
hasn't needed
hand,
it.
so you know, even that just hasn't.
Now
it's
it
so
comes
crazy.
down. Yeah, I agree. And now for Flurry. This was the turn he needed to buy himself time to get to because of exactly Tortollan Pilgrim into the puzzle box of Yogg-Saron.
If he gets it, there's still
It is time.
There's still a fair amount of spells in the deck.
That's
though.
true. Oh,
Blizzard? He has to, right?
Okay, he's alive with Blizzard. Yes, he does have to, I think.
I can't see the cards behind, but I'm pretty sure the Giants have more than 4 health.
Ryvius going to be very happy to see that, given, of course, how bad it could have gone had he had to wrestle with the puzzle box. Wow. Whoa.
Whatever. Add to the list. The boys
Doomsayer.
are back in town. Derek.
Doomsayer finally coming down, obviously too late because there's no freeze effects, and Ryvius holding onto a Conjurer's Calling there allows him, obviously, to deal with that very effectively.
I really want to see some like no-scope puzzle boxes where someone's like Frostnova Doomsayer and the puzzle box saves your board and just kills the Doomsayer. You'd be like, well,
Never happens. Never ever
but it
happens.
could.
But it could.
Let me dream, Derek.
Archmage, the weaker version here by a significant margin than Violet Warden, which is the exact same minion plus Taunt.
Yep.
Would have made maybe enough time for Flurry to stay alive, but I'm not sure if it's happening with this.
Does not look good, and Ryvius is looking pretty smug on his camera as far as I can. Just slight smirks that was just before he covered
What
his
are you
mouth.
thinking of me now?
It's like, yeah, you want to play your fancy stuff. Couldn't afford to craft Reno, so I just played the 2-off deck.
So I just made a ridiculously expensive mage deck with a bunch
No,
of
he already had-
legendaries and epics.
That's what he put all his money into last expansion,
Ah,
so it's
right.
pretty much the same deck. Just needed a couple of Bone Wraiths.
I kind of thought Bone Wraith might be the neutral that goes in pretty much every deck. It's very strong.
I think it's one of those cards you could put in every deck, and
And
it
it would
wouldn't
be
make it
alright.
worse.
Yeah.
You know, it wouldn't make it that much worse anyway. And look, when you play more than one Conjurers, it gives you Conjurers more than twice.
Yeah, vast majority of the time here, Ryvius will be able to deliver lethal, and with that outcome off the Conjurer's Calling, he is able to close things out, bringing him up to 1-1, and also his opponent Flurry to 1 game apiece in terms of overall match records. I'd say that's pretty, well, obviously a nice turnaround for Ryvius to get up to a victory, at least in series week 1 of Grandmasters Season 2. Flurry, however, after a very strong start at the start of Grandmasters Season 1, I think he's going to be feeling a little bit sad that he's not able to get off to the same kind of start.
He is, definitely. But all these players, I think, other than relegation time exactly, it always feels bad week 1. It's like you've sat down, your first matches of the whole season. If they don't go your way, it's just getting off to a bad start. But there is plenty of time, there's plenty of games, plenty of matches left. And as if you did watch Season 1, we were working out multiple outcomes for multiple people to hit playoffs on the last game or the last match
So
of
close.
the day
Yeah.
of the last day of the last match to decide who goes to playoffs. people still had a chance, and now playoffs is 2 additional spots
Yeah.
both across both divisions, which means that's even more likely that everything's just still up for grabs up until the very last point. So there's still a lot to play for. If Flurry is, one of your favorite players to follow, I do actually watch Flurry stream a lot.
Really?
He's very funny. I don't understand a word he's saying, but that's when you know there's a good streamer.
That's true.
I can't understand a word. I still watch, and even when he doesn't particularly just play Hearthstone,
Yeah.
he's just very funny to watch, so I do recommend it. But yeah, if you're a fan, he's not out by any means. He's got plenty more time to go.
Yeah, I remember, I think on the final weekend of Grandmasters in the playoffs, before we went into it, I think there were only 3 players who were statistically eliminated from possibility.
Right, yeah.
Which is insane when there's 16 players and only 3 of them on the final weekend are eliminated completely. And then you factor in all 3 of those would have been vying to not be relegated in Season 2 as we bring in relegation. It's going to be a very exciting end to the
It's
season.
going to be intense. We've already seen players such as Amnesiac from the Americas region tweet out like, I want to be considered one of the best again.
Yeah.
I am going all in, super try hard, because I do think players over the past season or so have been a little bit lax.
I agree.
They weren't threatened with relegation for one season. They've maybe been doing some other things, and they've been a little bit lax considering this is their profession. This
Yeah.
is full-time. They're in the highest league that Hearthstone has to offer. So I think we're seeing a lot of people just pull their socks up